Welcome to What We Long For. Today we are talking about the slow grace of suffering, when God heals by changing you, not the situation. Honestly, that may feel uncomfortably familiar. Sometimes we ask God to change our circumstances, but instead He starts changing us. Not quickly, not dramatically, but slowly, in the quiet places of the soul where we're learning to let go, learning to wait, learning to trust Him more. In today's episode, we're going to explore what it means to be formed, not just delivered. We'll talk about how grace shows up when things remain hard, what Scripture says about being renewed day by day, and why some of the deepest healing God offers takes time. So, if you're in a season that feels unfinished, if things haven't changed yet, or if you are quietly wondering whether God is still working, you're not alone and you're in the right place. There are seasons in life that feel like they just won't change. You pray, you wait, you do everything you know to do, and still the weight of the season remains. The hardship of it stays, and it doesn't change. And somewhere in that waiting, a quiet question starts to surface. God, why haven't you changed this yet? Why haven't you moved? It's an honest question, and for many of us, it's not about doubt. Instead, it's about fatigue. You believe that God can change things. You've seen Him do it before, but for some reason, this time He hasn't. And that can feel confusing and heavy, and honestly, it can also feel lonely. Today, I want to offer you something that's probably not the answer you want, but I believe it's more lasting than any quick fix. What if the situation hasn't changed because you're the one being changed? What if grace isn't always about escape, but about endurance and renewal and a deep formation into Christ-likeness? That's what this episode is all about. The slow grace of suffering. The mercy of a God who's not just fixing problems, but forming people. We live in a world that celebrates instant solutions, fast healing, clear testimonies. But the reality of the Christian life is that some things don't resolve right away. Some things linger. And that doesn't mean that God is absent. It might mean He's closer than ever. Sometimes grace doesn't come like a breakthrough, even though we all pray and sing and hope that it does. Instead, sometimes grace comes like breath and air, quiet, steady, and sustaining you moment by moment. It comes like roots growing in the darkness, silent, invisible, but strong. It's tempting to think that if the pressure remains, something must be wrong. But it's Scripture that tells us a completely different story. It tells us that God renews us day by day, not all at once, not in a dramatic flash, but slowly, daily, and faithfully. Let's turn to 2 Corinthians 4:16-18. This is a passage written by Paul, not from a place of ease or resolution, but from the perspective of someone who has endured real hardship, physical weakness, and personal loneliness. And yet, listen to what he says. He writes, "So we do not lose heart. Though our outer self is wasting away, our inner self is being renewed day by day. For this light momentary affliction is preparing for us an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison, as we look not to the things that are seen, but to the things that are unseen. For the things that are seen are transient, but the things that are unseen are eternal." There are two movements here. One visible and one hidden. Outwardly, Paul says life is deteriorating. The outer self is wasting away. For him, this meant persecution and beatings, imprisonment and rejection. For us, it might look like weariness or unanswered prayer, grief that keeps returning, or the slow unraveling of plans that we thought were secure. But at the same time, inwardly, something else is happening. He says that our inner self is being renewed day by day. And that phrase, day by day, is important, because it reminds us that spiritual renewal isn't always immediate. It's not about one powerful moment where everything changes. It's about a quiet, consistent transformation that happens as we keep showing up in God's presence. Even when nothing around us seems to change, day by day, we are. The passage also reframes what Paul calls affliction. He doesn't pretend that it's pleasant or easy, but he does call it momentary, and he calls it light. This is because he's comparing it to something greater, an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison. In other words, there is a future glory being prepared for you through what you are walking through. Not apart from it, not in spite of it, but through it. And here's a key phrase in verse 18. As we look not to the things that are seen, but to the things that are unseen. Paul is training us to shift our vision, not to ignore reality, but to see more than what's on the surface, to recognize that God is always doing more than we can see, that his grace is at work even in the invisible places of the soul. So let's name what Paul is saying here. Yes, life may feel heavy and it's certainly hard. Yes, things may be breaking down on the outside, but no, you are not being undone. You are being renewed. Not forgotten, not skipped over, but slowly, carefully, patiently, day by day, remade into the image of Christ. God isn't just preparing something for you. Instead, he is preparing something in you. And that kind of renewal, it takes time. We just heard Paul describe a kind of daily inner renewal, a work of God that happens quietly in places we can't always see. Now let's take that idea a step further by looking at Hebrews 12:11. It says, "For the moment, all discipline seems painful, rather than pleasant, but later it yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness to those who have been trained by it." This verse speaks of a different kind of grace, a grace that trains, not comfort for the moment, but formation over time, as we've been speaking of. The author of Hebrews is honest here. What God allows in our lives for our growth doesn't always feel good when it's happening. A lot of times it actually feels quite the opposite. It may feel disruptive. It may feel like loss. It may feel like waiting far longer than we ever expected. But what matters isn't what it feels like in the moment. It's what it produces later. The peaceful fruit of righteousness. You see, there is a fruit being cultivated in your life that can't grow in shallow soil. The word translated as discipline in this passage is not about punishment. Instead, it refers to training and instruction, the intentional shaping of your character. Think of it more like an expert gardener tends a vine. He prunes it here, reinforcing it there, waiting for the right season, not just rushing the process. This discipline isn't meant to crush or correct for correction's sake. It's discipline that comes from love, from a God who sees what you're becoming and who is committed to your maturity. And the outcome, it's not just strength, not just character, but what the verse calls the peaceful fruit of righteousness. A life aligned with God, grounded in truth, marked by grace, full of peace that doesn't depend on your circumstances. This verse also invites us to stop measuring spiritual growth by how we feel in the moment. Formation, the process of becoming Christ-like, isn't always obvious. Instead, it's slow and sometimes invisible. And yet, it's bearing fruit. It's that inner steadiness that you didn't used to have, the humility that wasn't there 5 years ago, that deeper trust that you wouldn't have chosen to lean into or learn this way, but that you now carry like a treasure. So if you feel like you are in a season where nothing is moving, nothing is resolving, nothing is changing, take heart, because God is still forming you. So far, we have talked about the slow and steady work of God in renewing us and training us through pain. But how do we respond in what he's doing? How do we participate in that work? James 1:4 gives us a surprising answer. He says, "Let steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing." The answer? Let it. Let steadfastness, endurance, perseverance, staying power do its full work in you. This isn't a call to push through or to power up. Instead, it's a call to cooperate with the process, to allow what God is doing to unfold in its time without trying to rush through it or to escape it. Friends, there is a difference between enduring something because you have no other choice and choosing to remain open while God refines you through it. The Greek word for steadfastness, which I will not try to pronounce, is rich with meaning. It doesn't mean to grit your teeth and survive. It means to remain under pressure in a way that is shaped by hope. It's not passive waiting. Instead, it's an active choice to surrender day by day and to depend on God. James says that if we let this kind of endurance run its full course, we will be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. That certainly does not mean flawless. Instead, it means mature, whole, spiritually well-formed. So this passage really, it reframes what we often want to escape. The uncomfortable in-between spaces, the slow days where nothing seems to be happening, the seasons that feel like an actual waiting room. Instead, James is saying don't rush out of those places too quickly. Let them do their full work. God is doing something in you there that you cannot see yet, but it's essential to who you are becoming. This kind of endurance isn't about getting it right every day. It's about staying soft instead of shutting down. It's about remaining prayerful when answers don't come and when words run short. It's about trusting that transformation takes time, and your role is not to force it, but to stay open to it. Frankly, that's harder than it sounds. It's one thing to accept that God is forming you, and it's another to wait long enough for that formation to take root. But that's what James and Scripture really invites us into. The quiet strength of remaining, letting the process be slow, letting the discomfort linger a little longer than you want, and letting God do his work. Not just around you, but deep within you. There's a story in Scripture that helps us see the long, slow grace of God, not in theory, but in an actual person's life. It's the story of Joseph, a young man with a dream that felt full of promise, a dream that came from God. But almost immediately, everything began to fall apart. Joseph is betrayed by his brothers, thrown into a pit, sold into slavery, and then carried off to Egypt. He doesn't get a warning, he doesn't get an explanation, just a sudden, devastating loss of everything familiar. And what follows is years of silence, of setbacks, of waiting, years of being falsely accused, forgotten in prison, living faithfully with no visible reward or sign that the season is coming to an end. By the time Joseph is elevated to a position of influence in Pharaoh's court, over a decade has passed, and even then, it's still not the end of the story. The healing between him and his family comes later, slowly, with tears and time and testing. It would have been easy for Joseph to believe that God had forgotten him. But what we learn through his life is this: God's silence is not God's absence, and delay does not mean denial. Joseph wasn't just being preserved. He was being prepared. His character was being shaped in obscurity. His dependence on God was deepening. His ability to lead with wisdom and humility was forged in quiet, thankless years. By the time he is finally reunited with his brothers, he is no longer the same young man who once flaunted his dreams. He's a man who has been formed slowly, quietly, by the grace of God. And when he looks back over everything he walked through, he says this: "As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good." That's in Genesis 50, verse 20. Friends, that's the fruit of slow grace. It's not just surviving difficulty, it's being transformed through it, not in spite of injustice or waiting, but through them. Maybe you're in the part of the story that feels like a pit, or perhaps you're in the part of the story that feels like a prison, or the space between faithfulness and fulfillment. If so, Joseph reminds us that this isn't wasted. You're not being punished. Instead, you're being prepared. God may not have changed your situation yet, but that doesn't mean he isn't at work. He may be building something in you that can only grow in this season. Wisdom, trust, endurance, compassion, maturity. And when the time is right, he will bring resolution. But even if the resolution is far off, the renewal has already begun. You've just heard the story of Joseph. A life shaped not by instant answers, but by long seasons of hiddenness and disappointment and delay. And through it all, God was forming deeper than Joseph could have ever imagined. Now, I want to invite you to ask the same question of your own life. Where are you still waiting? Where have you been asking for change, but received silence or slowness instead? Where do you feel unfinished or unclear? You see, beneath all of those questions is a deeper one. Could God be forming something in you that cannot be rushed or formed elsewhere? Maybe it's a trust, maybe it's compassion, maybe it's a learning to receive grace, not as a rescue, but as renewal. If you're in a season where the ache has lasted longer than expected, or the answers haven't come, I want to remind you of this. You're not behind, you're not overlooked, and you are not being punished. You are being formed. There is fruit growing that you cannot see yet. And the slowness you may feel may be the mercy of God shaping your soul for the future he is already preparing. Grace doesn't always come quickly, but it always comes faithfully. So as you leave this moment, carry this with you. God is not slow in the way that we think of slowness. He is patient, He is present, and He is working in the unseen. You are not stuck, you're being shaped. And that is the slow grace of suffering. Thank you for spending this time with me today. I will see you next time here on What We Long For.